He had a huge event at the White House on Saturday afternoon in the Rose Garden, to your point, another big event at the White House for his new Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, surrounded by his top advisors, his top folks, the folks that are out on the campaign trail, sometimes with him, sometimes without him. Remember, the president's campaign is actually campaigning. They are doing bus tours. They are doing stops at local community centers, diners. They are trying to actually move on past this pandemic that they choose to ignore. That is going to be a massive problem right now to try to figure out how they move forward. And I got to tell you something, guys. Think about this for a second. Hope was around the president. The president has gotten this. Questions now need to be asked about who else is probably positive. At this point. Jordan spoke about a little earlier the fact that Hope was on Air Force One yesterday in quarantine. There were multiple people in the president's inner circle. Forget national security. Forget, his press secretary. The list just goes on and on of individuals that travel with this president. And the other thing I would note, too, that, think about how most offices and businesses and any place of work, frankly, right now, we are all operating differently. I'm speaking to you right now from one of the rooms in our house. We're not running the cameras in the bureau or anything like that. Granted, it's late at night, but it's also that we're not operating in normal functions. The White House is. They are operating, they are gathering, they are meeting in person. Things have not changed at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, despite the fact they have changed everywhere else across the 50 states.
And, John, a moment that stood out during the Democratic National Convention was when a woman whose father died from the coronavirus said the only pre-existing condition that her father had was trusting Donald Trump, supporting Donald Trump. He has a loyal base, but how do you see this? How do you see his base reacting to this? And will they ask, how is he able to keep the country safe if he wasn't even able to keep himself safe from this virus?
Look, that's going to be a question. I mean, look, we look at the pictures that came out from the rallies. I mean, I have the image of that rally he did in North Carolina burned in my brain simply for the fact that you had supporters on top of each other as he spoke to a large crowd outside an airport hangar, most of them not wearing a mask. I think that's going to raise a lot of questions now. If he can get it, who cannot get it? I mean, I think that's the way people do look at this president in some ways. Well, he's doing fine. He's healthy. He's out and about. He's traveling. Maybe this thing isn't real. I do think that is going to be a real issue right now for this president. Now, look, if it impacts votes, I think that's going to be something we're really going to have to look at, as we know from all of our polling and as our colleagues have been able to travel the country and speak to his supporters. A Trump supporter is more often than not usually a diehard supporter. And we know most people going into this election have pretty much made up their minds. But this is certainly going to be something that is going to give people pause. I know Rebecca Jarvis is already reporting that stock futures have been affected on this. We know the president raves and cheers on the stock market at every chance he gets. The morning hours are going to be quite interesting to what the world looks like when we will wake up. I don't think we're going to bed tonight, but we'll see what happens.
We are definitely not going to bed tonight because, again, this is breaking news that is out. John Santucci, thank you so much. Again, President Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. Outstanding questions here because we are in uncharted territory. The questions, Trump's condition at this point, even though the First Lady did tweet out that they are feeling good. Another question, any impact to Vice President Mike Pence? Has he been tested? Who else in the president's inner circle has been independent?
Starting out with any new project management software usually feels something like this. Where do you even start? Well, you've probably got some to-dos written down somewhere,
also,
right?
what happens to the remaining
Let's drop
debates?
those
Let's
in
bring
here.
in senior White House
There we go.
correspondent Cecilia Vega right
Let's
now.
give these some
Cecilia,
due dates in the order they need to be completed. Sure would be helpful to have these all mapped out on a calendar. Let's add one.
Is it surprising?
All right,
to
now
you?
let's
Because,
think about
yes,
that
we know this
presentation you've got
president,
next week.
and
Maybe
he
you
has
need a
kind of
spot to get your
flouted
thoughts
this whole
jotted down?
thing about not wearing masks, going to these rallies. Are we surprised by this diagnosis here?
I mean, it's shocking given where we are this close to
chronic medical conditions like heart disease, lung disease,
an
diabetes,
election.
being
In one
overweight
hand,
or
it's not shocking
or
after the news of Hope Hicks testing
much
positive
more
because
severe
she was
in
among
those
his
individuals.
closest aides. They were right next to each other.
And Dr. Allen, he went on to also say that take your hat off to the young because they have a health
contact with him. So
the immune system, but it affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing thing. Again, how problematic is that messaging since it conflicts with a lot of
right now? I think a huge question right now also has to do with Joe Biden.
What even his own medical experts said.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, that message is not true. We just learned from a large study done in
results of that test
southern India that actually children and young adults can be responsible for up to a third of transmissions.
His health and safety as well right now.
We did think earlier on that children may be less likely to get infected, less likely to transmit. You know, some of that may be true compared to adults, but we still know that children and young adults can be super spreaders. So really, again, this virus can infect anyone, and anyone can potentially transmit it to other people.
I keep thinking.
All right, Dr. Ellerin, also before you leave us, I also want to point out the fact that we know that Hope Hicks was displaying symptoms. We are waiting to find out, has the President of the United States exactly his condition? We know that the First Lady tweeted out saying they're feeling well. We know that the President's doctor says that he's keeping vigilant watch. But we have a number of questions into the White House about the president's exact condition at this hour. Yes, it's in the middle of the night, but we understand that with this breaking news, obviously having the president of the United States test positive for COVID-19, that is a major development. So at this point, I think I asked you earlier tonight, but I'll ask you again, when it comes to vigilant watch, what are those doctors looking for?
Right. So this is such an unpredictable virus. That's what's puzzling. Even within the same family, you can see some people with life-threatening illness and other people that are completely asymptomatic. What we have to remember is that this virus can infect just about every part of our body. So I think we have to be most vigilant about the lungs, making sure our oxygen levels are normal. People, believe it or not, can have dangerously low oxygen levels even as they're texting and feeling perfectly fine. So I think monitoring that is important, but it can affect the blood vessels and lead to clots, the brain, the heart. So really, close vigilance is key in this setting.
And the fact that the president is at the White House and not at Walter Reed Medical Center, what does that say to you?
Well, I mean, I think that's good news, meaning that, remember, most people who are infected with COVID-19 do well. That's true even with the elderly. I think what that means is he likely, either is not symptomatic or only has mild symptoms. I think what it means is that he's doing well. Obviously, if he were to be moved out of the White House, that would be a cause for more concern. But again, irrespective of where he is, we know that he has, some of the best medical attention, that the world can offer.
And Dr. Ellerin, what if the president doesn't display any symptoms? We hear that Hope Hicks might be displaying symptoms, but if the president or first lady do not display symptoms, does that send any kind of message? Is that something we should look into?
Well, Again, we've learned so many things about this virus that's different from other infections. And one of them is that you can transmit this virus even if you're not symptomatic. So, it may seem obvious that his senior advisor was the person who transmitted it to both the president and the first lady, but that's not necessarily true, meaning even a person who's asymptomatic could have given it to the person who becomes symptomatic. So how he got this is still unclear, but we know that close contact is the major risk factor for transmission. So, it's always good news when you don't have symptoms, but again, it takes about 7 days on average after infection for people that do develop more severe illness to manifest that. So I think only time will tell, and close monitoring is crucial.
Dr. Todd Ellerin there, infectious disease expert, thank you so much. We appreciate your expertise. And among many questions that we're trying to learn answers to is on the Democratic side, the president's Democratic rival, Joe Biden, who was in 6 feet, socially distant away from him during the presidential debate, but still in the proximity of the president. When it got pretty loud, there was, I'm pretty sure with the yelling and other things, they tell you need to stand even farther away. And so when it comes to Joe Biden, what steps are Joe Biden and his camp now taking at this point? We know that at least a month ago, Joe Biden said that he's been tested at least once. That was a month ago for COVID-19, and that he promised that he will get tested regularly during his general election campaign against the president. And we would expect for that to amp up. And we're a month away, a little more than 30 days away from the election. And
you mentioned Vice President Joe Biden, who has criticized the president heavily of his handling of the pandemic. He has not, he or his campaign have not come out and said anything yet or addressed the fact that the president has announced that he tested positive. But Vice President Mike Pence has. He says, Karen and I send our love and prayers to our dear friends, President Donald Trump and FLOTUS Melania Trump. We join millions across America praying for their full and swift recovery. God bless you, President Trump, and our wonderful First Lady, Melania. Of course, Vice President Mike Pence was set to go head-to-head with Joe Biden's running mate, Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala Harris, just next week. The future of that debate still in the air right now as well.
And still questions remain on how close has the vice president been to the president, and has he been tested, especially after this diagnosis of a positive COVID-19 test for President Trump.
Well, coming up, we have much more news ahead.
Stay with us. You're watching World News Now.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now, imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, The War Among Us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Premieres Tuesday, streaming on ABC News Live.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis. 18,000 tons. Patatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after
Also underscored the fact that the world is watching. And speaking of the global impact, news of the president's diagnosis sent stock futures tumbling. All three major averages looked set for significant losses when the market opens this morning. At one point, the Dow was predicted to drop more than 400 points at the opening bell. The major stock market averages across Asia slid overnight on the White House coronavirus news as well.
Yeah, our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, we spoke with her earlier as well. We know that all eyes are on the markets, on the stocks as well. We have a team of people who are monitoring every development across the globe, and especially in D.C. as we wait to learn more about the president and his condition.
Coming up, we have more on the president, his condition, and the news coming out of Washington.
You're watching World News Now.
With so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news.
You've just blown up The Bachelorette.
The Bachelorette season premiere Tuesday, October 13th on ABC.
It's being called the most consequential election of a lifetime, the most important vote, and with so much on the line, it demands the most straightforward newsmaking, real answers, the most informed voices from all sides. The countdown is on to the vote. What will our future look like? ABC's This Week with George.
Asalnya pedas gurih yang khas dari sambal ABC bawang pedas dengan bawang yang dirawat hingga rasanya tajam dan pekat. Wah, ini baru pedasnya gurih. Cobain sambal ABC bawang pedas dengan semua cemilan.
Positive for COVID-19 when it comes to, and by the way, live look at the White House right now. We know the president and the first lady are quarantining right now inside the White House. And so many questions about the politics of this all. We are in the heat of the 2020 presidential race with the election about a month away. And at this point, people are wondering, where does the president go from here when it comes to campaigning, when it comes to getting back out there, when it comes to some of the rhetoric, because we know that the president has been continuing to question election security as he hurls baseless allegations of voter fraud.
The Trump campaign is now suing the city of Philadelphia after its representatives were not allowed to enter election offices to watch as people registered to vote and filled out mail-in ballots. Now, Democratic officials across the country are pushing back. ABC's Elizabeth Schulze has the latest.
With early voting underway in many states, ongoing concerns about intimidation at the polls. President Trump continuing to make unfounded attacks on the integrity of the election in a strategy critics say is intended to discourage Americans so they don't show up to vote.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it.
State officials are now increasingly speaking out against the president's claims. Democratic governors of 11 states issued a joint statement saying there's absolutely no excuse for promoting the intimidation or harassment of voters. While the governor of Texas is limiting the number of locations where voters can drop off their ballots to just one per county, some of those counties with populations in the millions.
That's going to discourage those who are going to vote by mail. It's going to make it inconvenient for our seniors, for our voters with disabilities to cast their ballots in this way.
On the campaign trail Wednesday, Joe Biden reassured Americans their ballots will count, but they have to vote.
I'm urging the American people, go out and vote. Show up. If you can vote early, vote early. Vote whatever way is most convenient for you, but vote.
Both Trump and Biden attended a virtual dinner to raise money for Catholic charities. Amid ongoing fallout from their ruckus fight on the debate stage, the candidates adopting very different tones.
I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight, and next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country.
I know it's hard to see it right now. Our problems are so systemic. The losses are so catastrophic. But the American people don't give up. There is no quit in America.
Though the Commission on Presidential Debates still vowing to change the structure of the next two debates to ensure a more orderly discussion. President Trump tweeting he won't agree to any change to the rules. Joe Biden saying he would support changes like muting candidate microphones.
And in a major shift in strategy, the Biden campaign announced it will start in-person canvassing in battleground states. The campaign has been mostly virtual so far because of the pandemic. Elizabeth Schulze, ABC News, Washington.
Elizabeth, thank you. In other coronavirus-related news, a new pandemic relief bill passed by the House has little chance, if any chance, of becoming law. House Democrats approved the $2.2 trillion measure last night. It's unlikely to be taken up by the Senate, where Republicans say it's too costly. Negotiations on a bipartisan relief bill continue.
There would be a lot of questions for the White House. For example, when was this information known? Starting with the diagnosis of White House advisor Hope Hicks. When did they know it? Why did we learn about her diagnosis from reporters and not the White House? And also, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz brings a really great point up. She says it would be hard to fathom how many people should be or will be quarantined because of this. For example, the president has an immense security detail around him. There's a full staff at the White House. There's so many people. He visited multiple states. He held rallies. And most notably, he was in the same room as former Vice President Joe Biden with a small crowd, and also moderator Chris Wallace for that debate.
We are continuing to stay on top of this story throughout the morning. Please stay with us for more news. You are watching World News Now.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you. ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Hello? This is Montana Highway Patrol. You're looking for a couple of missing teenagers. That's right. Last seen in a red Focus.
The steering wheel is getting stiff. Lock the door. We're fine.
Got ourselves a predicament.
The best of the Northern Fleet are heading south, but the locals know where the giants lie. The battle lines have been drawn, and the tide is calling. Wicked Tuna Outer Banks. New episodes Sundays at 9 on National Geographic.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know seems to change, well, like...
The most powerful stories. Our time, anytime.
We move up to the vehicle. He detonates the bomb.
The heroes who stopped the killer, who held the city of Austin hostage for 19 days.
It's a tripwire.
All hands on deck. The clues, the Home Depot video, that truck.
is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News, there for you.
Besides.
Welcome back. We are covering the breaking news coming out of Washington, where President Trump has tested positive for COVID-19 along with the First Lady. Earlier, we were looking at the White House, where the President and the First Lady are in quarantine after testing positive. This is an incredible moment in history, Mona. I'm pretty sure that the White House, at least in modern history, has not been the site or the scene of a infectious disease quarantine. But this morning, it is.
And the situation is developing. Once the sun comes up, it is going to be a whole different day, different coverage, different campaign going forward. The Trump campaign, we haven't heard from them yet and how they plan on addressing this situation going forward. The president has, in his own words, said that he downplayed the virus so that he didn't create panic. He has been openly critical of mask wearing, openly critical of the former Vice President Joe Biden wearing masks in public. And now that he has contracted the virus, we want to know how the campaign plans on moving forward.
And we are seeing the headlines this morning on the papers. I think we have some of those to put up on the screen right now. We have seen some of those headlines coming up, and I want to. There were some that were.
I was going to say the Daily News just put one word: infected, with a picture of the president and his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, by his side.
Yep.
We have the Star Tribune. I believe you have that one up already.
Yeah, it says Trump has virus. President and First Lady test positive for contact after contact with aide. We're also seeing from the New York Post saying president has COVID. San Francisco Chronicle, Trump says he has virus. So yes, one of our folks we were talking to earlier said this is the news that's shot around the world here. Everyone is paying attention to this major development of President Trump testing positive for COVID-19.
Particularly since the White House said that the president gets tested multiple times a day for the virus. The president is the most tested man in America, according to his press secretary. But yet, we learned about his White House advisor, Hope Hicks, testing positive through reporters, not through the White House. This news, though, we heard from the president himself. He's the one who tweeted this out this morning at 12:54 a.m., of course, sending shockwaves throughout the country.
And as you see, the president's closest advisors right there, Hope Hicks, Stephen Miller, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and husband to his daughter, Ivanka Trump, all getting on Marine One, a very tight space before getting onto Air Force One and traveling with the president. And so, again, we will continue to monitor this breaking news here on World News Now and America This Morning. Stay with us.
In times like these, the news making events
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Top advisors Hope Hicks tested positive. The president and first lady now in quarantine, saying they are doing well.
But major questions this morning. When did the White House know? And did the president expose other people? He tested positive only hours after traveling to New Jersey. And what does this mean for the presidential race and the upcoming debate?
We have all sides covered with our team of ABC News correspondents right now on America This Morning.
From ABC News in New York, this is America This Morning.
Good Friday morning, everyone. We begin with that breaking news. President Trump is in self-quarantine after he and the First Lady tested positive for the coronavirus.
It comes after Hope Hicks, one of the president's closest aides, tested positive Wednesday. The Washington Post reports despite knowing about Hicks testing positive, the president and his aides went to his golf club in New Jersey yesterday for a fundraiser instead of quarantining.
We did hear from the president's doctor overnight. ABC's Alex Prochet begins our coverage right now from Washington. Alex, good morning.
Mona and Kenneth, good morning to you. Yes, that advisor, Hope Hicks, she serves as counselor to the president and travels with him frequently, including multiple times this week. This morning, the coronavirus pandemic reaching the Oval Office. President Trump tweeting overnight, the First Lady and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. The First Lady adding, as too many Americans have done this year, the President and I are quarantining at home. Please be sure you are staying safe and we will get through this together. The White House physician saying both are well and they plan to remain at home within the White House. Late Thursday, President Trump announced plans to quarantine after one of his closest advisors, Hope Hicks, tested positive for the coronavirus. Sources telling ABC News Hicks is experiencing symptoms. The president saying this on Fox News.
You know Hope very well. She's fantastic, and she's done a great job. But it's very, very hard when you are with people from the military or for law enforcement, and they come over to you and they want to hug you and they want to kiss you because we really have done a good job for them. And you get close and things happen.
She traveled with the president multiple times this week, including that trip to Cleveland Tuesday for the first presidential debate. Sources also telling ABC News Hicks tested positive the following day. President Trump mocked Joe Biden for wearing a mask at that debate. He's also admitted to downplaying the virus and has held rallies that defy his own White House coronavirus guidelines. The president just said this on Thursday.
We are on track to develop and distribute a vaccine before the end of the year, and maybe substantially before. And I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight.
Throughout this pandemic, more than 7 million people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus in the U.S., and more than 207,000 have died. Now, another question going forward is, what does this do to the Trump campaign? The White House has already released a revised schedule for this weekend. That controversial rally in Wisconsin has now been canceled. Kenneth and Mona.
We are definitely in uncharted territory here. Alex, let's get to another major question this morning. President Trump is 74 years old. His age and weight put him right there in that high-risk category. Yes, his doctor says he's doing well, but do we know if the president has any symptoms?
Kenneth, right now, we do not. That White House physician saying that they're both doing well. We do know that Hope Hicks, his counselor, has been symptomatic. Now, look, that can be a range of symptoms. We know that the coronavirus can present itself like a flu. There's also other symptoms like a loss of sense of smell or taste. But right now, we don't know if Hope Hicks has any of those, and we certainly don't know if the president is exhibiting symptoms as well.
Again, the president's doctors, his team of doctors, say they're keeping a vigilant watch. Alex Prochet, they're live in Washington. Thank you. And just last night, President Trump was quoted saying the end of the pandemic is in sight.
Moments ago, we spoke with our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, to get his thoughts on the president testing positive and what this means going forward.
The president has gone forward with, as if the pandemic was a thing of the past. In fact, he just spoke via video to New York's Al Smith dinner, talking about the pandemic as something that was very soon going to be over. This has been his theme. Those have been his words, but it's also been his actions. The president announced Amy Coney Barrett as his nominee for the Supreme Court vacancy created by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the White House over the weekend. It was an event that was held in the Rose Garden. It was a Rose Garden that was packed. People seated shoulder to shoulder, virtually nobody there wearing masks. This has been routine. This is the way. I mean, I was out at the debate in Cleveland, and you saw the president's staff. He had 20 seats set aside for family and advisors, and almost none of them were wearing masks. At one point, somebody from the Cleveland Clinic, which hosted the debate, had to come in and hand out masks to the president's family and supporters. It's almost as a badge of honor that the president and his senior staff have almost never been seen wearing masks. I mean, only a handful of times have we seen the president himself wearing a mask, let alone his top advisors. This has been. I mean, I go to the White House quite frequently. There are signs as you enter the White House complex that say maintain social distancing, 6 feet apart. You go inside that White House complex, and as a matter of course, the press maintains social distance and wears masks, but you do not see the same thing happening by and large for the senior staff in the West Wing. This is a White House that has tried to send out a message to the American public that this thing is over, meaning the pandemic is over. And now we see dramatically in this statement from the White House that is obviously not true.
Jonathan Karl, thank you. And Vice President Mike Pence tweeted overnight saying he and his wife Karen send their love and prayers to the president. Many are now wondering who may have been exposed to the president.
ABC News White House producer Jordan Phelps was on Air Force One with President Trump this week. She spoke to us overnight about the president's travel.
I think it's important to point out that the White House has sort of praised itself for having this bubble from the coronavirus. Every day, anyone who is going to go into contact with the president gets a test at the beginning of the day, a rapid test. That was the case for me on Wednesday morning when I was set to travel with the president and his team on Air Force One as the travel pooler for ABC News. It's very common for most of the people on that plane not to wear a mask except for the press corps. I went to one of these mega rallies, which have just been stunning events to go to amid this pandemic. It's really like stepping into an alternate reality where right now so many of us are limiting our contacts in our day-to-day lives, skipping basic trips to the grocery store, and you show up at one of these rallies with thousands of people there, the president's supporters, the president not wearing a mask, most people in those audiences, frankly, also not wearing masks. As we've been talking about, the president famously downplays the importance of wearing masks, and clearly his supporters have taken those cues from the president, even though he insists that he is in favor of masks. You know, we talk about an October surprise. It is hard to fathom a bigger October surprise than the president actually catching the virus that he has been so defiant about and downplaying in the lead up to this election. It's just hard to understate how remarkable these rallies have been where the president, we've asked the president repeatedly, aren't you worried for yourself? Aren't you worried for your supporters who are there to get sick? The president, the White House have always emphasized that the president is kept at some distance, that they have these intense testing regimens in place to protect the president. Of course, unsaid among all of that is the people who are there taking that risk upon themselves to be in the crowd, not socially distant. The White House has always said, look, this is an issue of freedom of speech, and they are not afraid of this virus. Clearly, this now is evidence that the White House maybe had reason to be more afraid than they have been, and the confidence that they had in that testing bubble has clearly now been shattered.
ABC News producer Jordan Phelps there. Jordan has been covering the Trump White House since the beginning, and this news is already affecting the stock market. Dow futures have been dropping sharply overnight.
Earlier, Kenneth and I spoke with ABC News Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz about the impact of the president testing positive.
The world is already looking at the United States in terms of COVID-19 and the record the United States has with COVID-19, and they heard and hear constantly what the president is saying about it, and that it is not something he worries about greatly in terms of himself and others in the White House because they're protected in some ways because they're tested all the time. And if it can hit the White House, it really truly can hit anywhere. Other foreign leaders certainly looking towards the U.S. as well, and the reaction here. We're certainly going to have to look at all of his national security team as well and keep an eye on them. I mean, the president does get briefed, an intelligence brief, very frequently. I believe he was supposed to have one on Friday morning as well. That will be off. They obviously can brief him, but this could very easily spread through the White House. The president meets with all kinds of people. It's not just Hope Hicks anymore. I mean, you're talking about hours later. The president also tested positive, the First Lady as well. So they're going to have to look at all of the ramifications of this, people checking classified information, if they have to come into the White House. This will really reverberate through the entire White House.
And this news spreading across the world this morning, reaction coming in from other world leaders. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson tweeting out, "My best wishes to President Trump and the First Lady. Hope they both have a speedy recovery from the coronavirus." Of course, Boris Johnson himself contracted the coronavirus, spent weeks in the hospital, 3 days in the ICU, recovering from the coronavirus and his symptoms.
We're also hearing from another close ally of this country and the president's, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, saying, like millions of Israelis, Sarah and I are thinking of President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump and wish our friends a full and speedy recovery. That tweet coming in there as the world reacts to the president and the First Lady testing positive for COVID-19. Coming up, some of the other news of the morning, including new questions about security for the November election.
And plus, we'll talk to our Dr. Jen Ashton about the president's health. Make sure to stay with us.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working out?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying.
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, The War Among Us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Premieres Tuesday, streaming on ABC News Live.
Sex, gambling, fraud, betrayal, and murder. Cutthroat Inc., the podcast. A family on a mission to find their son. A year's worth of conversations with the killer. Cutthroat Inc. Subscribe for free now on your favorite podcast app.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
Pence, Harris, the anticipation.
We heard from the vice president. He's looking forward to seeing you on that debate stage.
Oh, good. Me too.
The vice presidential debate next Wednesday on ABC.
We turn now to new questions about security surrounding November's election and the legal battles brewing over mail-in ballots. The governor of Texas is taking new action, and in Pennsylvania, the Trump campaign is now suing Philadelphia. We turn back to ABC's Alex Perche for more on this report.
This morning, a potential legal battle brewing in Texas. Democrats are accusing Republican Governor Greg Abbott of voter suppression after he announced the state will limit the number of ballot drop-off locations to just one per county. This includes Harris County, which has a population of about 4.7 million people and nearly 200,000 square miles, an area larger than Rhode Island. The governor says the change will improve ballot security. Critics claim it's suppression.
It's going to discourage those who are going to vote by mail. It's going to make it inconvenient for our seniors, for our voters with disabilities.
Democrats in Texas have not said whether they'll take their fight to the court, but President Trump's campaign is following through on his threat to Philadelphia, now suing the city where election officials have opened satellite offices to help voters complete mail-in ballots. Campaign representatives are banned from those offices because the offices are not considered polling places. A lawsuit filed by the Trump campaign accuses the city of undermining election integrity by shrouding the casting of ballots in secrecy. Meanwhile, the White House is being pressed to provide evidence about this claim made repeatedly by the president.
They found a lot of ballots in a river. They throw them out if they have the name Trump on it, I guess.
It was a reporter from Fox News who asked what specifically the president was talking about.
Who is they that found those ballots, and where is this river anywhere in this country?
The local authorities. It was a ditch in Wisconsin that they were found, and I can get the article to your inbox if you'd like. And beyond that,
if he misspoke, that's fine.
No, I believe
he meant
that's what the president was referring to. And you're missing the forest for the trees here. The point is,
no, I cover the news, and I like to report accurately. When the president says they found a lot of ballots in a river, I simply want to know where the river is.
no, you simply want to ignore the fact of the matter.
The White House has not provided any evidence that ballots were thrown in a river. Mail was found in a ditch in Wisconsin, but state election officials say that no Wisconsin ballots were included. Kenneth and Mona.
All right, Alex, thank you. Coming up, we'll return to our top story, President Trump testing positive for coronavirus.
We'll talk to our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Jen Ashton, next.
If you manage a team, you have to try Monday.com. Monday.com.
America's #1 news is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news, and that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now. It's being called the most consequential election of a lifetime. The most important vote. And with so much on the line, it demands the most straightforward news-making, real answers. The most informed voices from all sides. The countdown is on to the vote. What will our future look like? ABC's This Week with George. It all plays out right here every Sunday.
The most consequential week yet of this hyper-political year.
Right as you get closer to casting your vote every Sunday on ABC.
Yes, mornings may look different these days, but where you start your day,
Where you spend your mornings, where you get connected to everything that's happening.
And face it, there's a whole lot happening in our world these days.
where you get all the breaking new information of the day to help you navigate through these times.
That's why we're here.
Good morning, sunshine.
And making sure you start your day off with a smile and some sunshine.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Oh, how I love saying that.
Welcome to Disney Plus. Are you ready? Drop in and explore. These are your worlds. Wherever and whenever you want them, you'll find them all here on Disney Plus.
From inside our homes to your home. Now is the time. We all just need each other. And that's why we love starting the day together with you. We'll see you in the morning
just like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
That's President Trump during Tuesday's presidential debate, mocking former Vice President Joe Biden for wearing a mask. The president tested positive for the coronavirus about 48 hours after that comment.
Earlier, we spoke with our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Jen Ashton, about the president's diagnosis and the importance of wearing a mask.
Right now, it is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important tool in our toolbox, in our arsenal fight against SARS-CoV-2. And we have data and evidence to support that. But distancing, mask wearing, being in well-ventilated spaces, minimizing exposure in crowded places, right now, that's all we have. So those measures, those so-called NPIs, the non-pharmaceutical interventions, incredibly powerful. I think it says the obvious. This virus does not discriminate. And just because you have great doctors and you live in the White House doesn't mean that the virus stops at the front door and then turns around. This will be the diagnosis heard around the world in terms of, when someone this well-known is affected with a medical or health crisis, there is an intrinsic opportunity here. And so whether or not we'll see the president completely switch gears and become kind of the walking PSA for mask wearing is unknown. But at this point, his physical condition, his medical condition, and the well-being of the president and those around him has to take first priority.
A big thanks there to Dr. Ashton.
Coming up, more of the other headlines, including a new study on drinking coffee and your health.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news. Hulu has live news. And that news is ABC News. ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now.
I'm very thankful that these men are fine.
Tuesday, October 13th. We respect your wishes. The Bachelorette is back.
This is the perfect place to fall in love.
But respect the rumors.
Do not. Ever talk to me like that.
It's true.
He thinks it drains your batteries. And of course, although we know he's clearly a very resilient character, he's probably got one of the most stressful jobs in the world. So I think when you combine that all together, it certainly is, it can't be underplayed. I think this is quite concerning.
But if you are asymptomatic, that changes everything, doesn't it?
Yes, in essence, Kay, yes. But the thing is, it's too early to say, because usually when people contract the virus until they get symptoms, on average, it takes a median time is 5 days. It can be up to 2 weeks. So I think we just have to watch this space. I think the other thing to add, a couple of things I'd say. One is, because he's clinically obese, we know certainly in relation to flu data and likely with COVID-19 as well, he's likely to carry the virus much longer. Rather than to be the 2 weeks, it may well be 4 weeks, which may have huge implications for his election campaign. So this needs to be closely monitored. Some of your previous commentators have talked about better treatments. To be perfectly honest, Kay, there is no real treatment unless you're already quite critically ill, you're in intensive care. Then, of course, drugs like dexamethasone do have an effect in probably about 1 in 8 people, is being life-saving. So we need to move away from this narrative about drugs and even vaccines. We don't even know when we're going to get a vaccine and how effective it will be. What we should all be really talking about, and I think President Trump's contracting COVID-19, it should be an opportunity for the whole country, for all of us to be talking about improving our health, metabolic health. We know one of the reasons that the UK's death rates have been so high, America's death rates have been so high, Brazil's death rates have been so high, even in India, is because of poor baseline underlying metabolic health, which is essentially linked to excess body fat, Kay. And this should be the primary discussion. Vitamin D is getting a lot more attention now. This is because people aren't outside enough or aren't getting it from their diet. And there's a very strong correlation with, low vitamin D levels, certainly in, especially in people from Black, Asian, ethnic minority groups, and increased risk of death. This should be the mainstream discussion, much more frequently than it has been.
Yep, I take my vitamin D every single morning. One of the big warning signs is the drop in oxygen levels in your blood, isn't it? I'm guessing the doctors are going to be across that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think from what we've heard so far, Kay, I don't think there's any issue with that from what we know at the moment. Again, this is very early days. But again, it's watch this space. As we know, if you remember with the Prime Minister, with Boris Johnson, when he initially contracted it, he carried on with his work. He was doing interviews via Skype, for example. And then it was over a period of a few days, he deteriorated quite dramatically. So at the beginning, all his parameters were completely fine, although he probably, had a bit of a fever and a sore throat, which as far as we know, President Trump nor Melania have at the moment.
Yeah, and as far as days to watch out for, we were speaking to a GP earlier, and he was saying between days 8 and 10 from when you contracted the virus are when you either start to get better or you go downhill.
Yes, absolutely, Kay. I think that's the key thing. We're going to have to be monitoring and seeing what he's up to and how he's been feeling over the next 7 to 10 days. And I think if he goes through that and he's completely fine, then he's probably on the home straight and he'll be absolutely fine to carry on, with his presidential work.
OK, for now, thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it. Thank you. What does all this mean for the markets? In New York, they open at 2:30 our time, 9:30 their time across the pond. But what's the reaction been here and indeed around the rest of the world? Ian King standing by. Hi, Ian. Thoughts?
Hello, Kay. Yes, I mean, you've had what's known really as a risk-off reaction in the jargon, but not a market one. I mean, the Australian stock market was still open when news came through that Trump had tested positive. The Aussie market finished down by some 1.4%. You also saw falls in Singapore and in Tokyo, the Nikkei 225, they're off 0.2%. The Chinese and Hong Kong markets are actually closed for a public holiday, so no reaction there. But in some indices in Asia, you even saw stocks rise. The Kospi in South Korea, for example, very big Southeast Asian market, that finished up by nearly 0.75%. Here in Europe, markets opened about an hour and 20 minutes ago or so to the downside. They're only trading off by between 0.5% to 1% lower. The FTSE 100 right now off 0.5%. So it's not a really dramatic move, to be perfectly honest with you. In terms of the US markets, well, the futures are indicating that they'll come off by around 1% at the open, which, as I say, isn't really dramatic. I think a lot of investors are struggling to work out whether this is really meaningful in terms of the economy. Obviously, the big question mark that's been hanging over the US of late is the size of the stimulus package that you're going to get from US lawmakers. And I think there's a feeling really that if the Democrats were to win the presidential election, it would probably be bigger, even bigger than the one that Trump is offering. But way against that, potentially Joe Biden seen as a higher tax and higher regulation president. So Wall Street pretty well agnostic in many ways as to who wins. They've liked bits of Donald Trump's presidency. They like the fact that he came in and he cut taxes and cut regulation, but they didn't like the fact that he then went on to start a trade war with China, ramped up tariffs against Chinese imports and imports from the EU as well. And that's not really what markets and what businesses want to see. So there's been a sort of fairly ambivalent approach to him throughout his time as president. I should talk to you about the currency markets as well. You see a move into safe havens on occasions like this. So the yen was trading high, the Swiss franc was trading high. You saw the dollar come up slightly against pound. The pound that's actually having quite a good session on news that Boris Johnson is talking to Ursula von der Leyen tomorrow. That's raised hopes that there may be some free trade deal with the EU. So sterling is strong against both the dollar and the euro this morning. And elsewhere, you've seen a move into other safe haven assets such as gold. That's up by 0.5%. The oil price has come off by 3% and is struggling to keep its head above $40 a barrel. And really, that's a continuation of a trend that we've seen for quite a while. I think the other overriding point to make about all this, Kay, is that markets have been grinding higher on hopes of a vaccine. Well, this is a reminder, if you ever needed one, that COVID-19 is far from being licked.
OK, for now, Ian, thanks. More from Ian at 10 o'clock. Time here is 9:30 time in Washington, 4:30 in the morning, where the president will be resting fitfully this morning after he heard the news that both he and the First Lady have tested positive for COVID-19. Comes after one of his closest aides and long-term advisor, Hope Hicks, contracted COVID. She travelled with the president on Air Force One and on board his helicopter Marine One in the days before the diagnosis. Ahead of his diagnosis, the president gave more details in an interview with Fox News last night.
She did test positive. I just heard about this. She tested positive. She's a hard worker, a lot of masks. She wears masks a lot, but she tested positive. And I just went out with a test. I'll see what, because we spent a lot of time, and the First Lady just went out with a test also. So whether we quarantine or whether we have it, I don't know.
He does now, because he's been told by the doctors that both of them do. Just hours before testing positive for COVID-19, Mr. Trump spoke at an annual fundraising dinner for Catholic charities. It was a virtual event this year, but the president remained hopeful about the future.
Through advances in treatment, we have reduced the fatality rate by 85% since just April. We are on track to develop and distribute a vaccine before the end of the year, and maybe substantially before. And I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight, and next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country.
So this is how the story unfolded and what is to come. Tuesday, Donald Trump went head-to-head with Joe Biden at the first presidential debate in Ohio. A day later, the president held a rally in Minnesota. His close aide, Hope Hicks, travelled with the president a number of times during the week, including on Air Force One. She began feeling unwell on Wednesday. Then, yesterday, the White House press briefing went ahead as planned. Yesterday afternoon, the president attended a fundraiser at his Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey. He returned to the White House last night. At some point, on the same day, Hope Hicks tested positive for coronavirus. That was yesterday. That prompted President Trump and the First Lady to get tested. And then late last night, this morning, UK time, their results came back positive. As the president is forced into quarantine at the White House, the Vice President, Mike Pence, will take more of a public role. He has his own major engagement coming up next Tuesday when he's due to face Kamala Harris in the first vice presidential debate. The second presidential debate is now less than 2 weeks away. That's taking place on the 15th of October in Miami, before a third and final debate on the 22nd of October in Nashville, Tennessee. Before that all-important date in the calendar, Election Day on Tuesday, the 3rd of November. Now, on Wednesday, before his aide, Hope Hicks, was diagnosed with coronavirus, Donald Trump went to a rally in Minnesota. Look at these pictures. We know that Mr. Trump travelled with Ms. Hicks. Part of that journey was aboard Marine One. At that event, the president was seen, as you can see, throwing campaign hats into the crowd. Yesterday, Ms. Hicks was diagnosed with the virus, and, as you know, the president tested positive this morning. Our US correspondent Greg Malam is standing by for us. My goodness me, how are the American people going to react to this? It's still early in the morning, isn't it, there?
Yeah, it is. They'll be waking up to this news in the next few hours. The president tweeted it actually just before 1 a.m. Washington time, so most of Washington will have been asleep. Most of the US will have been asleep when that news was confirmed. There'd been a couple of hours of anxiety and uncertainty where that news about Hope Hicks was confirmed, and a lot of discussion about what would happen. The president confirming he'd had that test along with the First Lady, and then came that confirmation. They talk a lot about the October surprise in election years here. Well, this is certainly it this year, very early in October. This is what the president tweeted at 1 a.m. Washington time. Tonight, the First Lady and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. The First Lady then tweeted this: as too many Americans have done this year, the President and I are quarantining at home after testing positive for COVID-19. We're feeling good and I've postponed all upcoming engagements. Please be sure you are staying safe and we will all get through this together. And the White House has also cancelled all of the President's events, certainly for Friday, and probably that will go on for many days as well. There was also a statement from the physician to the President, Sean Conley, which was released around the same time, saying that he was releasing this statement with the permission of the President. This evening I received confirmation that both President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump have tested positive for COVID-19. The President and First Lady are both well at this time, and they plan to remain at home within the White House during their convalescence. The White House medical team and I will remain on vigilant watch, and I appreciate the support provided by some of our country's greatest medical professionals and institutions. Rest assured, I expect the President to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering, and I'll keep you updated on any future developments. And that is the key thing. You heard those interviews that the President gave and that speech to the fundraising dinner, where he sounded pretty much as normal, and the doctors saying that he is doing well. So at the moment, it would appear he continues to run the government from within the residence in the White House, and they will hope that continues to be the case. But there are so many questions, particularly about a president who has done a lot to downplay the risk to all Americans, but also to himself. He's avoided wearing a mask most of the time. You mentioned that rally in Minnesota. He's had a number of those with big crowds there, lots of people not wearing masks, lots of people questioning whether the virus was a real threat. So those questions will come back now amid all of the questions about what this means, not only for the election campaign and those debates that are due to take place, but also the running of the government and how that will happen if he were to fall ill. But at the moment, they say he's doing well and recovering and will be in quarantine for some time.
OK, thank you. Earlier in the show, epidemiologist Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding told me that in his experience, there are some challenges for the president.
Initially it was actually just a matter of time, because if you look at the debate, the one side of the aisle was entirely masked, the Democratic side, and the Republican side of Trump allies was completely not masked whatsoever. And you see that at all his rallies. He goes to all these crowded rallies with almost zero distancing, indoors or half indoors, and they're just not taking precaution. So it is just a matter of time. And it's very, very unfortunate, though, that this has had to happen in the middle of this pandemic. And the other worrisome thing is, where did he get it from? He didn't get it from his aide, Hope Hicks, because if she just got sick, and they all both tested negative on the Tuesday night before the debate, that means they must have gotten sick much earlier than that over the weekend. And so I think this epidemic in the White House is much larger, and the number of people that needs to be quarantined is quite large.
I'm guessing also Joe Biden must be quite concerned about whether or not to have the second debate. But given what you've just said, he was in contact with the president after the weekend.
Yes, that's the other big question people are asking. And it is possible. There is a narrow window in which you can, while testing negative and not showing symptoms, you can be infectious. It's in the pre-symptomatic phase. A large number of infections have been recognized to happen in pre-symptomatic. So there is a narrow window in which before you test positive and you don't have symptoms, you could be spreading it. Now, they were arguing a lot on stage, but they were quite a distance apart in actuality. But it was quite a long debate, as you know, and lots of shouting. So it's a non-zero risk, but I don't think Biden has it, given the combination of factors such as distance and and that probably Trump had a very low viral load, if anything.
Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi standing by. Hello to you, Ashish. Let's try and flesh this out a bit more, should we? We know that the president is asymptomatic at this stage, but we also know that he is potentially high risk for all sorts of reasons.
He's in all the high-risk groups according to his age. He's 74 years old, and according to his body mass index, that puts him at somewhere between 30 and 31, which means if you look at any BMI calculators and they have a traffic light system, he's somewhere between amber and red, which is borderline high risk, not just at risk, but high risk. He weighs 244 pounds. We know that he doesn't take much exercise. He does like his golf, but that's as far as we know as far as his health regime is concerned. We also have to look at his health record. The latest one, I think, was published in June this year, which seemed to suggest that all the indicators were fine. They were what you would expect of a man who was that age and that weight, but certainly the indicator there was that he was taking statins, and that means they were preventing any further heart disease or to control his cholesterol. We know by looking at a report in the New York Times earlier this year that there was a report which said his coronary calcium CT scan in 2018 recorded a score of 133, meaning that he has a form of heart disease common to men in their 70s, and that would explain why he's on the statins. He's also on finasteride, which is a drug to control his prostate, and that's not uncommon too. But so all of the indicators are he's at the wrong age as far as he's concerned and COVID's concerned. He's 74 years old. Out of the 200,000 deaths in America, 8 out of 10 of those deaths have occurred where the patient has been over 65 years old. So they're going to have to keep a very close eye on the president over the next couple of days. The indicators are that he is in a good position right now, but we also know from our experience of COVID-19 that things can deteriorate very quickly. So they'll be keeping a very close eye on the president right now.
Okay, great. Thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Just looking at, as we're hearing there, the president's BMI is 30.4, which means that he is obese, a big challenge for him, or not. We don't know at this stage. We do know that he has tested positive for COVID-19, as has the First Lady. New York Times journalist and author Beth Gardner is with us. Hello to you, Beth. Good morning. Your reaction, first of all, to the news that both the President and the First Lady have tested positive for COVID-19.
Well, you know, I think we are at such a volatile and fraught moment right now as a country. You know, obviously just a month out from this incredibly bitterly fought election. You know, 2 weeks ago, I think not even, we had the death of the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which felt at that time like it was throwing this incredibly, you know, incendiary sort of issue into the midst of the election. And we've just been reeling kind of from one, you know, enormous event to the next over the past month. And I was thinking about Boris Johnson's illness, you know, which I think felt quite a trauma for this country earlier in the year. And that came at a moment of a fleeting moment, but a moment of, I think, unity for the UK. This comes at a moment of, you know, such, I think, divisiveness that is unprecedented in living memory for the United States. And Trump is obviously right at the center of that. He personifies that, you know, bitterness and divisiveness. His political sort of strategy has been to, you know, exacerbate it and throw fuel on it. So this just brings another sort of, you know, enormous event right into the middle of this really fraught moment in terms of the, you know, just the life of the country, and I think really the cohesiveness of the country. So I don't think anyone knows where we go from here.
Yeah, the October surprise, as we've been talking about all morning. One wonders when American people wake up, whether they are Trump supporters, Biden supporters, or none at all, how they might react to the news that the most influential man in the country has been laid low by this virus, a virus that he said just a few hours earlier was under control.
Sure. And I mean, there was actually a study that came out from Cornell University the other day that said Trump himself has been the single greatest propagator of misinformation and disinformation about this virus. He has obviously been, he told the journalist Bob Woodward, downplaying it intentionally from the start. I think that the reactions to everything to do with Trump are, almost kind of baked in at this point, right? For all of the enormous events that we've been talking about. And this is, actually not the first, quotes, October surprise, although some of them happened in September. We had the death of the Supreme Court justice, these huge revelations the other day about his non-payment of taxes. There's been multiple surprises, but one thing that has been actually quite notable about this race so far is that it hasn't really shifted that much. I think that people's, perceptions of the president are pretty baked in at this point. There's a portion of the country that literally thinks he's, sent by God. And there's a very large percentage of the country as well that thinks he is, a very, very clear and present danger to democracy as we know it. So, I think as with everything, and we've seen the way that he's really politicized this virus and this pandemic, I think that's inevitably going to play out in the way that people react to it as well.
If he does become more poorly, a question that, again, we've been asking this morning, is there any precedent for moving the date of the election? Of course, it's not set in stone here in the United Kingdom, but yours is. It's the first Tuesday in November, I think.
Yeah, it is set in stone. I can't imagine that moving. It's not, that's non-negotiable. I think what is pretty clear is that there is a line of succession should the president become, unable to carry out his duties. Responsibility can be temporarily handed over to the vice president. That's happened in the past. There's no, ambiguity there. But I doubt that there's any. I certainly never heard of any thought of moving an election date. That is pretty much written in stone constitutionally.
There must be some concern that what happened here in the UK might happen in the US as well, though, in that the Prime Minister was sick. We know that some of the top aides were sick. We know that the top scientist was sick. We know that the health secretary was sick. I spoke to the foreign secretary the other day, and he felt that he probably had it as well, although he hasn't had an antibody test. That has got to be a major concern in the White House, not least because we spoke to an epidemiologist earlier, and he said that he thinks that is a much bigger issue in the White House than has been accepted so far.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And actually, this is not the first time that the virus has been detected in the White House. There have been other aides. There was a valet who tested positive, personal valet to Trump. There have been multiple Secret Service agents. And, as you were showing some of the footage earlier, he's really reveled in, kind of defying any of the safeguards that other people have been taking. He's been holding rallies. There was a, pretty high profile death of one of his political supporters, Herman Cain, who may have picked up the virus at a rally and subsequently died. I who knows? Who knows who he's been seeing? But we do know that he's very, very rarely seen in a mask, and has not really, struggled to take this virus seriously, or has actually pushed back against taking it seriously. So, who knows how far it has spread. And I think that we've actually seen that in, political systems around the world, actually. Very often, it seems, in a lot of countries that sort of parliaments and political administrations have been sort of venues for viral super spreading. And as you suggested, Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, spent an hour and a half in an enclosed space, with Trump sort of yelling much of that time just a few nights ago. So he may be worried as well. I don't think we have any sense at this point, how far it may have spread. Is the vice president exposed? Is Dr. Fauci, the chief scientist, exposed? Other medical officials? It's unpredictable at this point, I would think.
Sure is. All we know for certain is that the president and the first lady have tested positive. Everything else up for grabs over the next week or so. It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Joining us now, Associate Professor in Global Politics at University College London, and that's Dr. Brian Klaas. Hello to you, Dr. Klaas. Thank you for joining us. Where do you think this leaves global politics? Where do you think this leaves US politics with only, well, less than a month ahead of the US presidential election with that bombshell news this morning?
Well, if we're just analyzing it from a political perspective, it's almost certainly going to be bad news for Donald Trump, not just on the personal health front, but also on his chances for re-election. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that he is losing badly in the polls by about 7 or 8 points in most polling averages. And so he needs to turn around the race and turn it around quickly. And this makes it more difficult for him to do that because he's unable to campaign while he quarantines, at least not in the way that he likes to in airport hangars and, with large rallies without masks. Now, the second reason why it's a problem for him is because this is an issue that Americans do not believe he's done a good job on, and it puts it center stage in the closing stages of the campaign. So the polls tend to suggest that around 60% of Americans think that Trump has poorly performed with handling the coronavirus pandemic, and that means that he is not trusted by the American people on this. It's a highly visceral reminder of that if you see constant news about the president's health, given that he has argued that the virus is going away like a miracle and that we're coming around the corner with the virus. So it's putting him at a very politically difficult point at a moment where he cannot afford to have any more loss of support.
However, Professor, if he bounces back, he's asymptomatic, he may have no challenges, no problems whatsoever. It's going to make him look invincible, isn't it?
Well, I think some people will say that, certainly. But the thing is that this is just a losing issue for him. The coronavirus pandemic is what he wants to run away from. What he wants to focus on is things like the Supreme Court pick, things like his economic recovery plans, not on the fact that, and I think this is worth repeating, about 1,000 people are dying every day in the United States right now, right? 970 people died yesterday in the United States from the coronavirus, much, much higher than other countries, even after you adjust for per capita. So the state of the pandemic is very dire in the United States. And it also raises these other points about how he handled it early on, where he dismissed mask wearing. He made fun of Joe Biden for wearing a mask 2.5 days ago in the debate. He called to liberate states from public health guidelines, which his own administration recommended. And he has consistently downplayed the seriousness of the virus, including with those Bob Woodward tapes that came out a couple weeks ago, which now seems like an eternity, that he was saying one thing to the American public while privately acknowledging how serious it was. So politically for him, this is a very difficult issue to run on at a moment where he really needs to turn around the election. And that's he's running out of time because many people have already voted by mail. I've already cast my ballot, for example.
So what does he need to do?
Well, that's a big question, and the answer to it is it's getting much more difficult to see a pathway to victory for him. Now, he could still win. There's no question. I mean, the polls are close enough. There could be polling error. There could be changes in the race in the next 30 days. But he needs to turn this around basically in the debates because it's the high-profile moments in which he can try to create a problem for the Biden camp and reset the narrative. Now, that didn't work in the first debate because the polling suggests that the overwhelming majority of Americans thought that Donald Trump lost that debate, and certainly among independents, which are the people that he really needs to win over. Now there are 2 more debates left. Will one of them happen, right? This is now a question because that's in 2 weeks. So if he's going to quarantine for the full 14 days, he may not be able to even attend the debate. And I don't think we're going to have a presidential debate over Zoom. So this raises serious questions about his ability to reset narratives that if they stay where they are now, will cause him to lose the election on November 3rd.
But we do have Nashville, Tennessee as well, don't we, which is just a few days before the election proper. And that then now becomes the main focus for both candidates, I'm guessing.
It does, but this is where this election is different from other elections because the scale of mail-in balloting is enormous. And by the time we get to the second debate in mid-October, if it does happen, tens of millions of ballots will likely already have been cast. So if you're trying to pick up swing voters, that pool of people that are persuadable is actually